The ship that came through the jump gate was small enough to make every alien on Conclave Station stop and stare at their sensor screens in confusion. They had expected a fleet. The 12 elder species of the galactic hegemony had sent their summons to humanity 3 weeks ago, and in those 3 weeks, they had prepared for the arrival of warships and carriers and heavy cruisers bristling with weapons, because that is what every other young species had done when called before the council. Instead, a single corvette drifted through the gate, no bigger than a cargo hauler, with a hull that looked like it had been patched more than once, and engines that wheezed like an old dog climbing stairs. High Arbiter Zorath Vel stood in the command center of the station and watched the tiny ship approach on the main display, his 8 limbs perfectly still, his armored carapace gleaming under the cold blue lights that the Veldrathi preferred. "One ship," said his aide, younger Veldrathi named Korath, who stood 2 steps behind him as protocol demanded. "I can count," Zorath replied. He did not like surprises, and this was a surprise, though he would never admit it to anyone in the room. The corvette requested docking permission in clean, polite galactic standard, and the station's automated systems granted it because there was no reason not to. And 7 minutes later, a human woman walked off the boarding ramp and into the reception corridor, where a dozen alien diplomats and their security details were waiting. Her name was Commander Lilith Vasquez, though the file said most humans called her Lily, and she was not what anyone had expected either. She was not tall by human standards, and certainly not tall by Veldrathi standards, where even the shortest adult stood over 3 meters. And she wore a simple dark uniform with no medals or ribbons or decorations of any kind, except for a single silver pin on her collar. The aliens recognized she carried 1 bag over her shoulder, and she smiled at the reception committee the way someone might smile at a neighbor they were meeting for the first time. "Thank you for having me," she said, and her voice was warm and unhurried and completely relaxed, as if she had arrived at a weekend retreat and not the most powerful diplomatic station in the known galaxy. Tayarn watched from the back of the reception group and tried to read the human the way she had been trained to read every species she had ever encountered. Tayarn was Selthari, which meant she was shorter than the human, and covered in smooth blue-gray skin that glistened faintly under the station lights. And she had been assigned as the human's liaison, which was the polite word for the job, though the real word was spy. She was supposed to watch the human, report on her behavior, identify her weaknesses, and feed that information back to the Security Council, could use it during negotiations. It was not a job Tayarn had asked for, but it was a job she intended to do well. She watched Lily shake hands with the Dranathi ambassador, a creature twice her size, with skin like cracked stone, and Lily did not flinch or pull back or show any sign that she found the alien frightening, which was unusual, because most species found the Dranathi very frightening indeed. "Commander Vasquez," Tayarn said, stepping forward when the formalities were done, "I have been assigned to assist you during your stay on the station." "Lily," the human said, and extended her hand, and Tayarn took it carefully because she had read that humans communicated trust through physical contact, and the human's grip was firm but not aggressive. "Tayarn," she replied. "That is a beautiful name," Lily said, and she sounded like she meant it, which made Tayarn immediately suspicious, because nobody complimented a spy on their name unless they already knew they were talking to a spy. Tayarn led her through the winding corridors of the station to the quarters that had been assigned, which were functional but deliberately austere, a subtle reminder that humanity was not yet considered worthy of comfort here. Lily looked around the small room with its hard bed and bare walls and single narrow window that looked out into the swirling radiation storms of the neutron star the station orbited. Lily looked around the small room with its hard bed and bare walls and single narrow window that looked out into the swirling radiation storms of the neutron star the station orbited. "I spent 8 months sleeping in a cargo container on a mining platform when I was 22. Lily said, "This has a window and a door that locks from the inside." Taearn did not know what to make of that, so she explained the schedule instead. Tomorrow, Lily would be brought before the full Security Council, where High Arbiter Zorath would present the hegemony's terms for humanity's integration into galactic society, which was a polite way of saying humanity would be told to give up 3 colony systems in the Myreth corridor and accept permanent military oversight or face consequences that no young species had ever been willing to face. It was a ritual the hegemony had performed many times before with many species, and it had never once failed, because the hegemony had spent 10,000 years perfecting the art of making others feel small. Lily listened to all of this and nodded, and asked a few questions about meal times and whether the station had a gym, and Taearn left the room 30 minutes later, feeling deeply unsettled in a way she could not explain. She filed her first report to the Security Council that evening. "The human is either empty-headed or operating on a level I cannot read," she wrote. "I am not yet certain which possibility concerns me more." 3 floors above, in a chamber carved from black stone, and lit by bioluminescent panels that pulsed like slow heartbeats, Zorath read the report and set it aside. "Prepare the demonstration," he said to Korath. It was a tool the hegemony had used for centuries, a way to break the spirit of lesser species before negotiations even began, and it had never failed to produce the desired result. Korath bowed and left to make the arrangements. Zorath stood at his window and looked out at the stars, and thought about the human woman who had arrived in a single ship with a single bag and a smile that did not belong in this place. He was not worried. He had broken 100 species before this one. One more would make no difference at all. The Grand Strategy Theater was built to make people feel like they were dying. That was not an exaggeration, and it was not a metaphor. It was the literal design purpose of the room, which the Veldrathi had constructed 4,000 years ago using technology that could project holographic images so real that the brain could not tell the difference between the projection and reality. The room was a sphere, 50 meters across, with no visible floor or ceiling once the projections activated, and the sound system did not just play audio. It vibrated the bones inside your body so that you felt explosions in your chest and heard screams inside your own skull. It was the most effective psychological weapon the hegemony had ever built, and they had never needed to fire a single shot from it. Lily was escorted to the theater the next morning, along with representatives from 3 other junior species who had been summoned alongside humanity. Arrived months earlier, and they had already been through several rounds of what the hegemony called orientation. The Pelori delegate was a small feathered creature who walked with a visible tremor in her legs. The Jirathi delegate was tall and thin, and kept clasping and unclasping his 4 hands, as if he could not decide whether to pray or run. The 3rd delegate, from the species Lily did not recognize, had not spoken a single word since arriving, and simply stared at the floor, with an expression that suggested he had already accepted whatever was about to happen. Taearn walked beside Lily, and said nothing, because there was nothing to say that would make this easier. And she had been ordered not to warn the human about what was coming, though part of her wanted to. They entered the theater, and the doors sealed behind them, with a sound like a tomb closing. Zorath was already there, standing on a raised platform at the center of the sphere, his 8 limbs folded in the formal Veldrathi posture of authority, and his voice filled the room without any visible amplification. "You have been brought here," he said, "to understand the nature of the institution you are being invited to join, and the power that sustains it." The lights went out. The sphere came alive. Suddenly they were floating in space above a green and blue world that Lily did not recognize, and Zorath's voice narrated as the hegemony's war fleet dropped out of hyperspace around it, like a noose tightening. "The scouring of Belvari Prime," Zorath said. 46 years ago, the Belvari refused integration, and we responded as we always respond. The fleet opened fire, and the world below them burned. The holographic technology was so advanced that Lily could feel the heat on her skin, could smell something that was meant to simulate burning atmosphere. And beside her, the Pelori delegate let out a high, thin scream and covered her eyes with her wings. Cities turned to glass, oceans boiled into steam, and the entire surface of the planet became a single sheet of glowing orange slag in under 4 minutes. The Belvari no longer exist, Zorath said, and his voice carried no emotion at all. The scene shifted, and they were inside a massive space battle, thousands of ships firing on each other in a corridor of asteroids, while a civilization's last defense fleet was torn apart piece by piece. The siege of the Dranathi Spine, Zorath continued, 10,000 ships against a species that believed their position was unassailable. The Dranathi ships exploded around them, and Lily watched a carrier break apart so close that she could see the tiny shapes of bodies tumbling into vacuum through the shattered hull. And the Jarathi delegate fell to his knees and began making sounds that might have been his species' version of weeping. Then came the Yulani submission, which was worse than the others. There were no explosions, just quiet footage of an entire species collapsing from the inside, as a targeted pathogen dissolved their ability to resist. And the unnamed delegate, who had been staring at the floor, finally looked up, and his expression was something beyond fear, something that looked like the death of hope itself. Lily stood with her arms folded through all of it. She tilted her head sometimes, the way a person might tilt their head while watching a moderately interesting documentary about bridge construction. And Zorath watched her from his platform, with his compound eyes fixed on her face, searching for the crack, the flinch, the moment where the mask would slip. It did not slip. The final sequence began, and the sphere filled with the image of a small station orbiting a dusty brown planet. And Lily recognized it before Zorath said a single word, because she would have recognized it in her sleep, in the dark, from any angle, at any distance. Battle of Kareth Station, Zorath said. 4 years ago, a rogue human mining outpost in contested space refused to surrender to hegemony patrol forces. The footage showed the station being hit from 3 sides by Veldrathi assault ships, showed the hull breaching, showed the small, desperate flashes of human weapons firing back from inside. 140 human civilians and 30 of their soldiers were killed, Zorath said. The engagement lasted less than 1 standard day, and it demonstrated conclusively that... Lily yawned. It was a real yawn, the kind that comes with a stretch of the arms and a slight tilt of the head, and the sound of it cut through the theater like a knife through silk, and every single person in the room turned to look at her. Zorath stopped speaking. The holographic battle froze in place around them, the station still burning, debris still hanging motionless in the void. Lily looked at the frozen image the way a bird studies a still window. Someone might look at an old photograph they had seen too many times. "Oh," she said, and her voice was perfectly casual and completely steady. "That is from my first deployment." The silence that followed was so deep that Taearn could hear her own heartbeat. Lily pointed at the frozen image of the station, at a specific section of the hull where the damage was heaviest, where the breaches were clustered together like wounds. "I was on that station," she said. "I was 19 years old, and I was an engineering technician, not a soldier. And when your boarding teams came through the airlock on C deck, I held that corridor for 11 hours with a sidearm and a welding torch." She turned to look directly at Zorath, and the smile on her face was the most terrifying thing Taearn had ever seen, because it was not angry, and it was not threatening, and it was not forced. It was the smile of someone who had already survived the worst thing that could ever happen to them and had come out the other side with the understanding that nothing in this room or any room could ever touch them again. "You want to know what happened to the hegemony boarding teams that came through our airlock?" Lily asked. Zorath said nothing. "No," Lily said softly, "you probably do not." The theater was silent for a long time. Then Zorath raised one of his 8 limbs and made a sharp gesture, and the holographic projections disappeared, and the lights came back on, and the sphere became just a room again, just walls and a floor and a ceiling. "This session is concluded," Zorath said, and his voice was flat and controlled. But Tearn had worked with the Veldrathi long enough to recognize what she heard beneath the control. It was doubt. For the first time in his career, the High Arbiter of the Galactic Hegemony dismissed a demonstration early, and the junior species delegates filed out in silence, and every single one of them looked at the human woman as they passed her with something new in their eyes. It was not pity, and it was not confusion. It was the beginning of something the hegemony had spent 10,000 years making sure no junior species ever felt. The door to her quarters closed, and the lock engaged, and Lily stood in the center of the small room for exactly 3 seconds before her hands started shaking. She sat on the edge of the bed and pressed her palms flat against her knees and focused on the pressure of her fingers against the fabric of her uniform, because that was the trick, the thing she had learned a long time ago, that if you gave your brain something physical to focus on, it was harder for the memories to pull you under. It did not always work. Tonight, it did not work. The memories came anyway, the way they always did, not like a flood, but like a tide, slow and heavy and impossible to hold back. And she was 19 again, and the station was shaking apart around her. Carrot's station had not been a military installation, and that was the first thing people always got wrong about it when they told the story later. It was a mining platform, a collection of pressurized modules bolted together in orbit around a planet that nobody had cared about until a survey team found rare mineral deposits in the crust. And the people who lived there were engineers and miners and technicians and their families. Not soldiers, not warriors, just people doing a job a long way from home. Lily had been assigned there straight out of technical training, her first real posting, and she had spent her first 3 months on Kareth learning how to maintain atmospheric recyclers and patch microfractures in hull plating, and play cards badly with the off-shift crew in the common room on B deck. She remembered the common room. She remembered the way it looked after the first missile hit. The ceiling torn open, the emergency lights casting everything in red, the card table flipped on its side, with someone's hand still holding their cards underneath it. Just the hand, nothing else. She remembered the sound of the alarms, and the sound of the hull breaching, and the sound of air screaming out through cracks in the walls. And she remembered senior technician Marcus Webb grabbing her by the shoulder and shoving a sidearm into her hands, and saying words she would never forget as long as she lived. "They are coming through C-Deck, and everyone above us is dead, so it is you and me and whatever we can find, Vasquez. So pick up something heavy and follow me." Webb was 46 years old, and he had been a Marine once, 20 years before Kareth, and he still moved like one, even though his knees were bad and his hearing was worse. And he led her and 4 other technicians down to C-Deck, where the airlock had been forced open, and the first Veldrathi shock troops were already pouring through. The Veldrathi were enormous up close, all armor and claws and compound eyes that reflected the emergency lights like mirrors, and the sound they made was something between a hiss and a scream, and the first time Lily saw one, she froze. Webb did not freeze. He put 3 rounds into the first one through the gap in its neck armor, and then turned to Lily and said, "Breathe." And she breathed, and then she started fighting, because the alternative was dying, and she was 19, and she was not ready to die on a mining station that nobody back home had ever heard of. 11 hours. They held C-Deck for 11 hours. Webb died in the 4th hour, hit by a plasma bolt that took most of his chest. And Lily held his hand while he went, and then she picked up his weapon and kept fighting, because that is what he would have told her to do. By the 6th hour, they had run out of ammunition, and Lily had picked up a welding torch and discovered that Veldrathi carapace armor, which could stop a bullet, could not stop a sustained beam of superheated plasma at close range, and she had burned through 3 torches and 2 boarding teams before the corridor was quiet enough to hear the evacuation shuttle docking on the far side of the station. She carried a wounded Marine named Reeves through 3 bulkheads to reach that shuttle, her left arm fractured in 2 places from where a Veldrathi had grabbed her and squeezed, and she did not feel the pain until she was on the shuttle and the adrenaline wore off, and then she felt it all at once and screamed for the first and only time that day. That was the story of Kareth Station. That was what the hegemony had played on their projectors as a demonstration of human weakness. Lily sat on the bed in her quarters on Conclave Station, and breathed in and breathed out and waited for her hands to stop shaking. And after a while they did, because they always did eventually, because she had practiced this part more times than she could count. There was a soft chime at the door. She checked her face in the small mirror on the wall, straightened her uniform, and opened the door. Yawned stood in the corridor, her blue-gray skin shimmering faintly under the lights, and she was holding a container that turned out to contain something warm and sweet that the Selthari considered a comfort drink. "I thought you might want company," Yawned said, and Lily could see in the alien woman's wide dark eyes that this was not part of her assignment, that this was not a spy's tactic, that this was simply one person checking on another person after something difficult. "Come in," Lily said. They sat together in the small room and drank the warm, sweet drink, and for a while neither of them said anything, and it was the most comfortable silence Lily had experienced since arriving on the station. "I have to ask you something," Yawned said finally, "and I understand if you do not want to answer." "Ask," Lily said. "In the theater, when they played that footage, were you truly not afraid?" Lily looked at her for a long moment, and then she set down her drink and said something that Yawned would think about for the rest of her life. "I was terrified," Lily said. "I am terrified right now, sitting here, talking to you, in this room, on this station, surrounded by species that could crush my bones with one hand." Yawned blinked in confusion because that was not what she had expected to hear from the woman who had yawned in the face of the most powerful military alliance in the galaxy. "The difference between me and the people in that room," Lily continued, "is not that I feel less fear. It is that fear does not get a vote." "I do not understand," Yawned said. "Humans feel everything," Lily said. "We feel fear and pain and grief and rage, and all of it hits us at once. And it never stops. Not really. It just gets quieter sometimes. But it never goes away. And what we learned a very long time ago, long before we ever left our planet, is that you cannot wait for the fear to go away before you act, because it will never go away. So you act with the fear still in you. You carry it with you like a weight, and you do what needs to be done anyway." Yawned was quiet for a long time after that. Then she said something that was absolutely not part of her assignment, and that she would not include in any report to the Security Council. "Zorath is not only posturing," she said. "He has a contingency fleet assembling in the Drorath corridor, 600 ships, and if you do not agree to the terms, he will use them to make an example of your outer colonies. He has done it before to others, and he will do it to you." Lily nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something she had already suspected. "Thank you," she said, and she meant it. Yawned left a few minutes later, and Lily sat alone in the quiet room, and thought about 600 ships, and thought about the outer colonies, and thought about all the 19-year-olds on mining stations, and research platforms, and farming settlements, who were living their lives, right now, without any idea what was coming. She opened a secure communication channel, encrypted with protocols that the hegemony did not know existed, because humanity had been very careful about what they let the galaxy see. Her message to Earth Command was 5 words long. They are not bluffing. Activate Oaken Threshold. She closed the channel and sat in the dark and waited. Somewhere far away, in the deep black between the stars, where no one was watching, something very large and very quiet began to move. The formal negotiation chamber was the oldest room on Conclave Station, carved from a single block of asteroid iron 6,000 years ago, when the first 3 elder species agreed to stop killing each other and start exploiting everyone else together. 12 seats ringed a circular table, 1 for each elder species, and each seat was designed to reflect the power and grandeur of the species that occupied it. The Veldrothi seat was a throne of black chitin, grown from the same biological material as their armor. The Drenothi sat on a slab of volcanic stone, hauled from their homeworld. The Selthari representative floated in a column of temperature-controlled water that served as both seat and life support. At the center of the ring, lower than all the other seats by exactly 1 meter, because symbolism mattered deeply to the hegemony, was a single plain chair, where the representative of the species under negotiation was expected to sit and look up at those who held power over them. Lily sat in that chair, and she did not look up. She looked straight ahead, which meant she was looking directly at Zorath, who sat across from her at eye level despite the height difference, because Lily had done something no one expected on her way into the chamber. She had brought her own chair. It was a simple folding chair from her Corvette's cargo bay, and she had carried it in herself and set it up before anyone could object. And by the time Zorath's aides had decided whether this was an insult or a breach of protocol, she was already sitting in it, with her legs crossed and a datapad on her knee. It was a small thing, but Tayarn, watching from the observation gallery above, understood exactly what it meant. It meant the human had no intention of looking up at anyone. Zorath opened the proceedings with the formal language that tradition demanded. 10 minutes of ceremonial declarations about the wisdom of the hegemonian, the benevolence of integration, and the sacred duty of elder species to guide the younger ones toward their proper place in the galactic order. Lily listened to all of it with polite attention. Then Zorath presented the terms. Humanity would cede sovereignty over 3 colony systems in the Myreth Corridor, and transfer all mining and development rights to the Hegemony Collective. Humanity would accept permanent Hegemony patrol vessels in human-controlled space, with full authority to board and inspect any human ship at any time. Humanity would limit its fleet expansion to no more than 50 new vessels per year, each subject to Hegemony design approval. Humanity would provide a tithe of raw materials annually, the amount to be determined by the Hegemony Economics Council. In exchange, humanity would receive protection, trade access, and the privilege of continued existence. These terms are standard, Zorath said. Negotiable. Lily nodded thoughtfully and made a note on her datapad, and then she said, I appreciate the clarity. May I present humanity's counterproposal? Zorath's compound eyes shifted slightly, which was the Veldrothi equivalent of a raised eyebrow, because no junior species had ever used the word counterproposal in this room before. You may, he said, because refusing would have been a breach of protocol, and the Veldrothi value protocol above almost everything. Lily tapped her datapad, and every delegate in the room simultaneously received a data package on their personal terminals. And the room went quiet, in a way that rooms only go quiet when something unexpected happens. And then the quiet deepened into something heavier as they began to read. Tayarn watched from the gallery as 12 of the most powerful beings in the galaxy read through the data package, and she watched their expressions change one by one like dominoes falling in slow motion. The Dranathi ambassador's stone face cracked, literally cracked, because Dranathi's skin fractured under extreme emotional stress. The Pelori delegate who sat as an observer began clicking her beak so fast it sounded like static. The Jarathi representative stood up from his seat and then sat back down and then stood up again, as if his body could not decide what to do with the information his brain was processing. The data package was not a military threat. It was not a list of demands. It was the most comprehensive intelligence dossier that had ever been assembled on the inner workings of the galactic hegemony. And it contained everything. Every secret trade agreement that the Veldrathi had signed with the Korathi behind the backs of their supposed allies. Every illegal bioweapon stockpile that the Dranathi maintained in violation of the hegemony's own treaties. Every backchannel deal, every rigged vote, every manipulated conflict, every instance where one elder species had sacrificed another's interests for their own gain over the past 600 years. There was evidence that the Veldrathi had engineered a border war between the Selthari and the Jarathi 60 years ago, specifically to weaken both species and secure mining rights in the contested zone. There was proof that 3 elder species had been secretly trading with the Belvari before the Scouring, and had voted for their destruction, specifically to eliminate a trade competitor. There were communications, financial records, fleet movements, spy networks, assassination orders, all of it documented and verified and cross-referenced with a level of detail that made it clear this was not a bluff, and it was not a fabrication. Lily waited until every delegate had finished reading, and then she spoke in the same calm, warm voice she had used when she told Taearn that her name was beautiful. Humanity did not come to this station to fight, she said. We came because we have spent the last 20 years studying the hegemony, and we have come to understand something important about how it works. She looked around the table at 12 species who had ruled the galaxy for millennia. This is not an alliance, she said. It is a protection racket held together by fear and mutual ignorance, and every species at this table knows it, but none of you have ever said it out loud, because the moment you say it out loud, the whole thing falls apart. So here is our counter-proposal, she continued. Full and equal partnership for humanity, open intelligence sharing between all member species, mutual defense agreements that are actually mutual, and a restructuring of the Council so that no single species holds veto power over any other. She paused and let that sink in. Or, she said, and her voice was still warm and still calm, but there was something underneath it now, something that Taearn recognized as the same quiet steel she had heard in the woman's voice when she talked about Kareth's station. We release the full unredacted dossier to every species in the galaxy simultaneously. Every junior species, every uncontacted civilization, every trade partner, every colony world, everyone. The hegemony does not collapse because humanity attacks it, Lily said. It collapses because the truth becomes impossible to ignore. Zorath had been still through all of this, perfectly still in the way that Veldrathi became still when they were calculating whether to negotiate or to kill. And when he finally spoke, his voice was ice. You are bluffing, he said. I am not, Lily said. Then you are a fool, Zorath said, because we have 600 ships in the Drorath corridor that can reach your outer colonies in 36 hours and turn everything you have built into dust. Lily nodded as if she had been expecting him to say exactly that. Fleet, she said. I have known for 6 days. She tapped her datapad one more time. The main display screen that dominated the wall behind Zorath's throne activated, and every head in the room turned to look at it. And what they saw made the room go silent again. But this silence was different from the last one. This silence was the silence of people who were recalculating everything they thought they knew. The display showed a live sensor feed from the Drorath corridor, where Zorath's contingency fleet of 600 warships was assembled in formation, waiting for the order to move. And sitting among them, so close that they could have reached out and touched the Veldrathi hulls, were 32 human ships that had not been there an hour ago, or rather, that had been there for days, but that no one had detected because they were wrapped in stealth technology that the hegemony did not know existed. 32 ships was not a lot compared to 600, but they were positioned in a perfect interdiction pattern, each one sitting beside a Veldrathi command vessel, and every delegate in the room understood what that meant. It meant that if the fleet tried to move, those 32 ships could cripple the command structure before a single order could be given. It meant humanity had been inside the hegemony's most secret military operation for days, and no one had noticed. It meant everything the hegemony believed about human capability was wrong. "We did not come to fight," Lily said one more time, and her voice was quiet and steady. "But you should know that we always come prepared to." Zorath stared at the display for a long time. "This session is recessed," he said, and his voice was not ice anymore. It was something Tayarn had never heard from a Veldrathi before. It was the sound of someone who had just realized that the chair they were sitting in had been pulled out from under them a long time ago, and they were only now beginning to fall. The delegates filed out in silence, and within the hour, 4 of them had opened back-channel communications directly with Lily. Not through the hegemony, not through Zorath, but directly, privately, quietly. The cracks had been there for centuries. All Lily had done was show everyone where they were. The hegemony did not collapse the way empires collapse in stories, with fire and thunder and dramatic last stands on the steps of a burning capital. It collapsed the way a dam collapses when you remove one stone at a time until there is nothing left to hold back the water. Within 6 hours of the session's recess, the Selthari formally withdrew from Zorath's defense coalition and announced their intent to negotiate directly with humanity. And Tayarn was the one who delivered the message to Lily personally, because she had requested the assignment, and because she was done pretending to be a spy. Within 12 hours, the Korathi and the Millenni followed, both species citing the evidence in the dossier that the Veldrathi had been manipulating their trade agreements for over 2 centuries, and both species expressing a sudden and intense interest in the concept of mutual defense agreements that were actually mutual. Within 24 hours, 7 of the 12 elder species had broken ranks, and the Hegemony Security Council, which had not experienced a single defection in 6,000 years, had lost its majority. The Dranathi were the last to move, not because they were loyal to Zoroth, but because they were slow to make decisions about anything. And when they finally sent their message to Lily, it was characteristically blunt. "We have reviewed your evidence, and we acknowledge its accuracy, and we would like to discuss terms. But first we want to know how you obtained our bioweapon facility locations, because those were supposed to be classified at the highest level." Lily replied that she would be happy to discuss intelligence methods in a more appropriate setting, and the Dranathi accepted this, with the grudging respect of one warrior acknowledging another. Zoroth watched it all from his chamber, and said nothing to anyone for a very long time. On the second day, he requested a private meeting with Lily. No aides, no observers, no recording devices, just the 2 of them in a small room that had never been used for anything important before. Tayarn tried to talk Lily out of going alone. "He is a Veldrathi," Tayarn said. "They are proud and they are dangerous, and you have humiliated him in front of everyone he has ever commanded. I do not think this is safe." "I know," Lily said, and she went anyway. The room was bare and the lights were dim, and Zorath stood by the window, looking out at the neutron star, whose radiation storms painted the void in colors that human eyes could barely process. And when Lily entered, he did not turn around. She sat down in the Omni chair, and waited because she had learned a long time ago that the most powerful thing you could do in a negotiation was let the silence work for you. Zorath spoke first. "I have been High Arbiter for 38 standard years," he said, "and in that time I have overseen the integration of 11 species into the hegemony, and I have authorized military action against 4 species that refused, and I have never once questioned whether I was doing the right thing." He turned to face her, and his compound eyes were dark and still, and Lily could not read Veldrathi expressions the way Taearn could, but she thought she saw something in the way he held his limbs that looked like exhaustion. "How?" he said, and the word carried more weight than any speech she had heard him give. "How what?" Lily asked. "How did a species that has been in space for less than 3 centuries do what you have done? You are children. You are infants by the standards of galactic civilization. You should not have survived Carrot's station, let alone turned it into the foundation for an intelligence apparatus capable of dismantling the oldest alliance in known space." Lily looked at him for a long time before she answered. "You made a mistake," she said. "Which one?" Zorath asked, and there was something in his voice that might have been dark humor. "Careth," Lily said, "you attacked us when we were small and weak, and you assumed that would make us afraid forever, that we would be like the others, that we would learn our place and accept it, and be grateful that you let us live." She leaned forward in her chair. "But that is not how humans work," she said. "When you hit us, we do not become afraid. Or rather, we do become afraid, but that is not where it ends. It is where it starts. And what comes after the fear is something you have never had to deal with before. Because no other species in your experience processes it the way we do." "And what is that?" Zorath asked. "Anger," Lily said. "Slow, patient, organized anger that does not burn out, and does not forget, and does not stop working until the job is done." She told him the truth then, the whole truth, because she sensed that he needed to hear it, and because there was no tactical advantage left to protect. The intelligence network that had produced the dossier, the network that had mapped every secret and every lie and every hidden weapon in the hegemony, had been created by the survivors of Careth Station. Not by Earth Command, not by the military, not by any government directive, but by a group of people who had crawled out of the wreckage of a mining platform and decided that what had happened to them would never happen to anyone else. Every single operative in the program had either survived Careth or lost someone there, and they had spent 20 years building the most comprehensive intelligence apparatus in galactic history. Not because they were ordered to, but because they remembered. "You created us," Lily said. "Careth made us. Every analyst and operative and field agent who put that dossier together carries that station with them every day. And everything you saw in that data package is the product of people who decided that fear was not enough of a reason to sit still." Zorath was quiet for a very long time. "I remember authorizing the Careth operation," he said finally. "It was a footnote in a weekly briefing, a minor action against a minor outpost. I spent more time that day choosing my evening meal than I spent considering whether to destroy your station." "I know," Lily said. "That is what made it unforgivable." They looked at each other across the small room, and something shifted between them. Not friendship and not forgiveness, but a recognition of something that had not existed between humans and Veldrathi before. It was respect, reluctant and hard-won, and built on the bones of people who had died in a corridor on a station that should never have mattered to anyone. "What happens now?" Zorath asked. "That depends on you," Lily said. "You can fight us, and you will lose, not because we're stronger, but because your own allies will not fight beside you anymore. Or you can sit at the table as an equal, and help us build something that does not require fear to hold it together." "I have never been anyone's equal," Zorath said. "Neither have I," Lily said. "I was a 19-year-old technician with a welding torch, and now I am sitting across from the most powerful military commander in the galaxy, telling him that his empire is over. Nobody starts out as what they become." Zorath made a sound that Lily did not recognize, and that she later learned was the Veldrathi equivalent of a laugh, though it had not been heard from a high arbiter in living memory. "You are a very strange species," he said. "We know," Lily said. 6 months later, the conclave had been restructured from the ground up. The galactic hegemony was formally dissolved and replaced by the Allied Council of Sovereign Species, a name that Lily had argued for, because the word sovereign mattered and the word allied mattered, and putting them together meant something that no previous galactic institution had ever tried to mean. Humanity held a permanent seat on the new Security Council, not as a junior species and not as a conqueror, but as a founding member, which was a term that the Selthari had proposed and that every other species had accepted because it carried no implication of hierarchy. Yawned had been reassigned as the Selthari's first official ambassador to Earth, and she had requested the posting herself because she said she wanted to understand humans better, and because Lily had become her friend, and Yawned had never had a friend from another species before. Zoroth remained on the station in a reduced role, advisor to the new council, a position that carried no military authority and that he had accepted with a dignity that surprised everyone who knew him. He and Lily spoke regularly, and their conversations were never easy and never comfortable and were always productive, which Lily said was the most you could ask from any relationship built on top of a war. On a quiet evening, 6 months after the conclave was reformed, Lily returned to Earth for the first time in 3 years, and she took a transport to the memorial that had been built in a park overlooking the ocean, in a city where the sun set over the water, in colors that reminded her of the neutron star. The memorial was a wall, plain and dark, with 170 names carved into it, one for each person who had died on Kareth Station. And Lily stood in front of it as the sun went down and traced the names with her fingers. She found Marcus Webb, and she rested her hand on his name for a long time. She found the others, the ones she had fought beside, the ones she had carried, the ones she had not been able to save, and she said their names out loud, because she believed that names should be spoken and not just read. When she was done, she stood back and looked at the wall, and the sky above it were appearing. And somewhere up there, she knew, human ships and alien ships were flying together for the first time, not because the galaxy had learned to love humanity, but because it had learned something more important. It had learned that the most dangerous species in the galaxy was not the one with the biggest fleet, or the oldest civilization, or the most advanced weapons. It was the one that remembered. And standing there in the fading light, with the names of the dead at her back, and the stars ahead of her, Lily whispered the only words that mattered. We kept the airlock, and we did not stop there. Then she turned and walked away, and the stars burned on above the memorial, in silence. The same stars that had watched a 19-year-old girl with a welding torch hold a corridor against impossible odds. The same stars that would watch whatever came next, because the universe does not care about courage or fear or anger or love, but humans do. Humans care about all of it, and that, in the end, was what made all the difference.